Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Om Ganana Antva Ganamavamahe, Kavim Kavinam Pavashravastramam, Jeshtarajam Brahmanan, Brahmanaspada, Anushrunnoti Visi Rasadanam, Om Mahaganadipati Namaha. We came to the 23rd chapter of the Ekadasha Skanda of Mahabhagavata Purana, dear friends. Om Keshwaya Namaha, Om Namaha, Om Madhvaya Namaha, Om Govindaya Namaha, Om Vishnuve Namaha, Matsudhanaya Namaha, Trivikramaya Namaha, Vamanaya Namaha, Sridharaya Namaha, Hrishikeshaya Namaha, Padmanabhaya Namaha, Damodaraya Namaha, Krishnaya Namaha, Vasudevaya Namaha, Pradyumnaya Namaha, Niruddhaya Namaha, Purushottamaya Namaha, Dokshaya Namaha, Narasimhaya Namaha, Achyutaya Namaha, Janardhanaya Namaha, Upendraya Namaha, Hare Namaha, Sri Krishna Namaha. We came to the 23rd chapter. It's called Song of Avanthi Brahmana or Tikshtu Brahmana Itihasa. It's also called Bhikshu Gita. Shukama Maharishi is telling this. This chapter tells the story of a Brahmana sannyasi from the Avanthi country as an example of how one should tolerate the disturbances and offenses created by the evil persons. We have to tolerate. That's called titukshna. We have to tolerate the offenses of other people. The harsh words of uncouth persons pierce the heart even more severely than arrows. At a mendicant Brahmana from the city of Avanti, even while being attacked by wicked men, considered this trouble to be simply the consequence of his own past deeds and tolerated it with utmost sobriety. Previously, the Brahmana had been an agriculturist and merchant. Previously, the Brahmana was agriculturist and merchant. He had been extremely greedy, miserly, and prone to anger. As a result, his wife, sons, daughters, relatives, and servants were all deprived of every kind of enjoyment and gradually came to behave unaffectionately toward him. He had been extremely greedy, miserly, and prone to anger. As a result, his wife, sons, daughters, relatives, and servants were all deprived of every kind of enjoyment and gradually came to behave unaffectionately toward him. In due course of time, thieves, family members, and providence took away the sum total of his wealth. Finding himself without any property and abandoned by everyone, the Brahmana developed a deep sense of renunciation. He considered how the earning and preservation of wealth involve great effort, fear, anxiety, confusion. He considered how the earning and preservation of wealth involve a great effort, fear, anxiety, confusion. Because of wealth, there arise 15 unwanted items of thievery, violence, lying, deception, lust, anger, pride, and feverishness, disagreement, hatredness, distrust, conflict, attachment to woman, gambling, intoxication. There are so many unwanted things can happen by being a wealthy person. Somebody come and steal his properties and steal his silver and gold items, and somebody may hurt him, cause violence. Somebody come and cheat and telling lies, deception, behaving like that, lust, anger, pride, feverishness, disagreement, hatredness, distrust, conflict, attachment to woman, gambling, intoxication. All this happens because of the wealth. When this meditation arose in his heart, the Brahmana could understand that the Supreme Lord, Sri Hari, had somehow become satisfied with him. He felt that only because the Lord was pleased with him, had the apparently unfavorable turn of events in his life occurred. He was grateful that a sense of detachment had arisen in his heart. He was grateful that a sense of detachment had arisen in his heart and considered it the factual means for delivering his soul. In this condition, he determined to engage the duration of his life in the worship of Lord Hari and thus accepted the mendicant order of Tridandi Sannyasa. He was grateful that a sense of detachment has arisen in his heart and considered it the factual means for delivering his soul. In this condition, he determined to engage the duration of his life in the worship of Lord Hari and thus accepted the mendicant order of Tridandi Sannyasa. Subsequently, he would enter different villages to beg charity. Subsequently, he would enter different villages to beg for charity, but the people would harass and disturb him. But he simply tolerated all this, remaining firm as a mountain. He remained fixed in his chosen spiritual practice and sang a song renowned as the Bhikshu Gita. Neither the mortal persons nor the gods, the soul, and the ruling planets, the reactions of work, nor time, are the cause of one's happiness and distress. Rather, the mind alone is their cause, because it is the mind that makes the spirit soul wander in the cycle of material life. The real purpose of all charity, religiosity, and so forth is to bring the mind under control. A person who has already composed his mind in meditation has no need for these other processes. And for a person who is incapable of fixing his mind, they are of no practical use. The false conception of material ego binds the transcendental soul to the material sense objects. The Avanthi Brahmana, therefore, became determined to bring himself over the insurmountable. The Avanthi Brahmana, therefore, became determined to bring himself over the insurmountable ocean of material existence by rendering service to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, Mukunda. With the same, the Avanti Brahmana therefore became determined to bring himself over this insurmountable ocean of material existence by rendering service to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, Mukunda, with the same perfect faith in the Lord exhibited by the great devotees of the past. Only when one can focus his intelligence on the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, can the mind be completely subdued. This is the essence of all practical prescriptions for spiritual advancement. Shuka Uvacha. This is the summary of the chapter 23rd. Shuka Maharshi is telling Parikshit Sri Badarayani Uvacha, otherwise called Shuka Uvacha. स एवमाशंसितं उद्धवेन भागवतमुख्येन दाशार्घ्यमुख्यः सभाजयन् मृत्युवचो मुकुन्दः समाभभाषे श्रवणीयवीर्यः. Lord Mukunda, Shuka Maharshi is telling to Parikshit, Lord Mukunda, the chief of the Dasharas, having thus been respectfully requested by the best of his devotees, Sri Uddhava, first acknowledged the fitness of his servant's statements. Then the Lord, whose glorious exploits are most worthy of being heard, began to reply to him. Sri Bhagavan Vacha. So Lord Krishna is telling, Varya Sattvasya Vainatra Sadurve Durjane Ritai Durekshad Vinnamatmana Ya Samadhutam Ishvaraha Samadhatum Ishvaraha. Lord Krishna said, O disciple of Brihaspati, that is Uddhava, there is virtually no saintly man in this world capable of resettling his own mind after it has been disturbed by the insulting words of uncivilized man. In the modern age, there is a widespread propaganda ridiculing the path of spiritual realization, and thus even Saintly devotees are disturbed to see the progress of human society being obstructed. Still, a devotee of the Lord must tolerate any personal insult, though he cannot tolerate offense against the Lord himself or the Lord's pure devotee. Sharp arrows which pierce one's chest and reach the heart do not cause as much suffering as the arrows of harsh. The sharp arrows which pierce one's chest and reach the heart do not cause as much suffering as the arrows of harsh. Insulting words that become lodged within the heart when spoken by uncivilized man. कथयन्ति महत्पुण्यमिति मास मिहोद्भवः समहं सुवर्णयिष्यामि निबोध संसामायितः. My dear Uddhava, in this regard, a most pious story is told, and I shall now describe to you. Please listen with careful attention. That's Lord Krishna is telling Uddhava. Lord will now relate to Uddhava a historical account which teaches how to tolerate the insults of others. One certain sannyasi was insulted in many ways by impious man. However, with the determination, he remembered that he was suffering the fruit of his own previous karma. I will narrate to you his story and that which he spoke. In the country of Avanthi, there once lived a certain Brahmana who was very rich and gifted with all opulences, and who was engaged in the occupation of commerce. But he was miserly person, lusty, greedy, and very prone to anger. According to Srila Sridhara Swami, the Avanti country is the district of Malwa. This Brahmana was extremely wealthy, doing business in agriculture, banking, and so on. Being a miser, he suffered agony when his hard-earned wealth was lost, as will be described by the Lord himself. In his home, devoid of religiosity, lawful sense of gratification, the family members and guests were never properly respected, even with awards. He would not even allow sufficient gratification for his own body at the suitable times. Since he was so hard-hearted and miserly, his sons, in-laws, wife, daughters, and servants began to feel inimical toward him. Becoming disgusted, they would never treat him with affection. In this way, they prescribed the presiding deities of the five family. In this way, the presiding deities of the five family sacrificers became angry at the Brahmana, who being niggardly guarded his wealth like a yaksha, who had no good destination, either in this world or the next, and who was totally deprived of religiosity and sense enjoyment. O magnanimous Uddhava, by his neglect of these demigods, O magnanimous Uddhava, by his neglect of these demigods, he depleted his stock of piety and all his wealth. The accumulation of his repeated exhaustive endeavors was totally lost. The Brahmana stock of piety became like a withered branch that no longer gives fruits or flowers. Srila Jiva Goswami comments that the Brahmana had trace of piety directed to the Supreme Lord with hopes of liberation. The pure portion of the branch of his piety remained unwithered, eventually giving the fruit of knowledge. Some of the wealth of this so-called Brahmana was taken away by his relatives. My dear Uddhava, some by the thieves, some by the whims of providence, some by the effects of time, some by ordinary men, and some by government authorities. Finally, when his property was completely lost, he who never engaged in religiosity or sense enjoyment became ignored by his family members. Thus, he began to feel unbearable anxiety. Having lost all his wealth, he felt great pain and lamentation. His throat choked up with tears. He meditated upon for a long time on his fortune. Then a powerful feeling of renunciation came over him. The Brahmana had previously been trained in pious life, but his past goodness was covered by his offensive behavior. The Brahmana had previously been trained in pious life, but his past goodness was covered by his offensive behavior. Finally, his previous purity was reawakened within him. The Brahmana spoke as follows: "Oh, what great misfortune! I have simply tormented myself uselessly, struggling so hard for money that was not even intended for religiosity or material enjoyment. Generally, the wealth of misers never allows them any happiness. In this life, it causes their self torment, and when they die, it sends them to hell. A miser is afraid to spend his money even for obligatory religious and social duties. Offending God and people in general, he goes to hell. Whatever pure fame is possessed by the famous, and whatever praiseworthy qualities are found in the virtuous are destroyed by even a small amount of greed, just as one's attractive physical beauty is ruined by trace of white leprosy. In the evening, attainment, increase, protection, expense, loss of enjoyment of wealth, all men experience great labor, fear, anxiety, and delusion. Theft, violence, speaking lies, duplicity, lust, anger, perplexity, pride, quarreling, enmity, faithlessness, envy, and the dangers caused by women, gambling, and intoxication are the 15 undesirable qualities. There are 15 undesirable qualities that contaminate men because of the greed of wealth. Although these qualities are undesirable, men falsely ascribe value to them. One desiring to achieve the real benefit of life should therefore remain aloof from undesirable material wealth. Even a man's brothers, wife, parents, and friends united with him in love will immediately break off their affectionate relationships and become enemies over a single coin. For even a small amount of money, these relatives and friends became very agitated and their anger is inflamed. Acting as rivals, they quickly give up all sentiments of goodwill and will reject one at a moment's notice, even to the point of committing murder. Those who obtain human life, which is prayed for even by the demigods, and in that human birth become situated as first class Brahmanas, are extremely fortunate. If they disregard this important opportunity, they are certainly killing their own self interest and thus achieve a most unfortunate end. What moral man, having achieved this human life, which is the very gateway to both heaven and liberation, would willingly become attached to that abode of worthlessness, material property, that which one intends to use for one's personal sense gratification is called material property, whereas paraphernalia to be used in the Lord's loving service is understood to be spiritual. One should give up all one's material property by utilizing the completely in the devotional service of the Lord. A person who owns luxurious mansion should install the deity of the Lord and hold regular programs to propagate Krishna consciousness. Similarly, wealth should be used to build temples and the wealth should be used to build the temples of the Lord and publish literature scientifically explaining the personality of Godhead. One who blindly renounces material property without utilizing it in the service of the Lord does not understand that everything belongs to the personality of Godhead. Such a blind renunciation is based on the material idea that this property could belong to me, but I don't want it. Everything in fact belongs to God. Knowing this, one neither tries to enjoy nor to reject the things of this world, but peacefully engages them in the service of the Lord. One who fails to distribute his wealth to the shareholder, the gods, the sages, the forefathers, and ordinary living entities, as well as his immediate relatives, in laws, and oneself, is maintaining his wealth simply like a yaksha and will fall down. One who does not share his wealth with the above mentioned authorized persons and does not even enjoy the wealth himself will certainly suffer unlimited problems in the life. Discriminating persons are able to utilize their money, youth, and strength to achieve perfection. But I have feverishly, I have feverishly squandered these in the useless endeavor for further wealth. Now that I am an old man, what can I achieve? Why must an intelligent man suffer by his constant vain efforts to get wealth? Indeed, this whole world is most bewildered by someone's illusory potency. For one who is in the grips of the death, what is the use of wealth are those who offer it. Sense gratification are those who offer it, or for the matter, any type of fruitive activity which simply causes one to again take birth in the material world. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Hari, who contains within himself all the demigods, all the other gods, must be satisfied with me. Indeed, he has brought me to this suffering condition and forced me to experience detachment, which is the boat to carry me over this ocean of material life. If there is any time remaining in my life, I will perform austerities and force my body to subsist on the bare necessities. Without further confusion, I shall pursue that which constitutes my entire self interest in life, and I shall remain satisfied within the self. Thus, may the presiding other gods of these three worlds kindly show their mercy upon me. Indeed, Maharaja Katwanga was able to achieve the spiritual world in a single moment. Lord Sri Krishna continued, his mind thus determined that most excellent Avanthi Brahmana was able to untie the knots of desire within his heart. He then assumed the role of a peaceful and silent sannyasi mendicant. He wandered about the earth, keeping his intelligence, senses, and life air under control. To beg charity, he traveled alone to various cities and villages. He did not advertise. He did not advertise his advanced spiritual position, and thus was not recognized by others. O Kainduldewa, seeing him as an old, dirty beggar, rowdy persons would dishonor him with many insults. Some of these persons would take away his sannyasi's rod and some of them water pot which he was using as a begging bowl. Some took his deerskin seat, some his chanting beads, and some would steal his torn, ragged clothing. Displaying these things before him, they would pretend to offer them back, but would then hide them again. When he was sitting on the bank of a river, about to partake of the food that he had collected by his begging, sinful rascals would come and pass urine on it, and they would dare to spit on his head. Although he had taken a vow of silence, they would try to make him speak. And if he did not speak, they would beat him with sticks. Others would chastise him, saying, "This man is just a thief." And others would bind him up with rope, shouting, "Tie him up, tie him up." They would criticize and insult him, saying, "This man is just a hypocrite and a cheat. He makes a business of religion simply because he lost all his wealth and his family threw him out. This man is just a hypocrite and a cheat." That's what the family members said to him. He makes a business of religion simply because he lost all his wealth and his family threw him out. (38 and 39). क्लिपन्नेके पजानन्त एष धर्मध्वजः तपसः क्षीणमित्तम् इमां मृत्युमग्रहीत् स्वनोज्जततः। अहो एष महासुरो धृतवान् गिरिराडव मौनेन साधयत्यर्थं भगवद्दृढनिश्चयः। Some would ridicule him by saying, "Just see this greatly powerful sage. Just see this greatly powerful sage. He is steadfast at Himalaya mountains. By practice of silence, he strives for his goal. With a great determination, just like a duck, other persons would pass foul air upon him. Sometimes others would bind this twice-born Brahmana in chains and keep him captive like a pet animal." The Brahmana understood that all his suffering from other living beings, from higher forces of nature, and from his own body was unavoidable, being allotted to him by providence. Many cruel persons harassed the Brahmana, and his own body caused by him suffering in the form of a fever, hunger, thirst, and fatigue, etc. The higher forces of nature are those that cause excessive heat, cold, and crime. The Brahmana realized that his suffering was due to his false identification with his material body and not to the interaction of his body with external phenomena. Rather than try to adjust his external situation, he tried to adjust his Krishna consciousness and thus realized his actual identity was eternal spirit soul. Even while being insulted by these low-class men who were trying to effect his downfall, he remained steady in his spiritual duties. Fixing his resolution in the mode of goodness, he began to chant the following song. Resolution in the mode of goodness is described in Bhagavad Gita. O son of Pratha, that determination which is unbreakable, which is sustained with steadfastness by yoga practice, and thus controls the mind, life, and the acts of the senses, is in the mode of goodness. The Brahmana said, "These people are not the cause of my happiness and distress. Neither are the demigods, my own body, the planets, my past work or time. Rather, it is the mind alone that causes the happiness and distress and perpetuates the rotation of material life." मनोगुणान् वैसृजित बलीय ततश्च कर्माणि विलक्षणानि शुक्लानि कृष्णरतलोहितानि तेभ्यः सुवर्णः स्ततयो भवन्ति स्मृतयो भवन्ति. The powerful mind actuates the functions of the material modes, from which evolve the different kinds of material activities in the modes of goodness, ignorance, and passion. From the activities in each of these modes develop the corresponding status of life. In mode of goodness, one considers oneself to be a saintly or wise person. The mode of passion, one struggles for material success. And in the mode of ignorance, one becomes cruel, lazy, and sinful. By the combination of the material modes, one identifies oneself as demigod, a king, a rich capitalist, a wise scholar, etc. These conceptions are material designations generated from the modes of nature, and they arrange themselves according to the tendency of the powerful mind to enjoy temporary sense of gratification. The word Belias in this verse, meaning very strong, indicates that the material mind becomes insensitive to intelligent advice. Even if we are informed that we are committing many sins and offenses in order to earn money, we may still think that money should be acquired at all costs, since without it, one can neither perform religious ceremonies nor gratify the with senses with beautiful women, mansions, and vehicles. Once the money is achieved, one suffers further problems, but the stubborn mind will never heed good advice in this regard. One must therefore give up mental concoction and control of the mind in Krishna consciousness, as exemplified here by the Brahmana from Avanthi. Although present along with the struggling mind within the material body, the supersoul is not enduring because he is already endured with the transcendental enlightenment. Acting as my friend, he simply witnesses from his transcendental position. I, the infinitesimal spirit soul, on the other hand, have embraced this mind, which is the mirror reflecting the image of the material world. Thus, I have become engaged in enjoying objects of desire and am entangled due to contact with the modes of nature. Charity, prescribed by duties, observance of major and minor regulative principles, hearing from scripture, pious works, and purifying oaths all have as their final aim of the subduing of the mind. Indeed, concentration of the mind on the Supreme is the highest yoga. Indeed, concentration of the mind on the Supreme Being is the highest yoga. The highest yoga is concentrated on Lord Krishna. If one's mind is perfectly fixed and pacified, then tell me what need does one have to perform ritualistic charity and other pious rituals? And if one's mind remains uncontrolled, lost in ignorance, then of what use are those engaged for him? All the senses have been under the control of the mind since time immemorial, and the mind himself never comes under the sway of the other. He is stronger than the strongest, and his godlike power is fearsome. Therefore, anyone who can bring the mind under control, because the master of all the senses has allowed given permission. Failing to conquer this irrepressible enemy, failing to conquer this irrepressible enemy, the mind whose urges are intolerance and who torments the heart, many people are completely bewildered and create useless quarrel with others. Thus, they conclude that other people are either their friends or their enemies or parties indifferent to them. Falsely identifying oneself as the material body and accepting bodily expansion such as children and grandchildren to be one's eternal property. One completely forgets that every living being is qualitatively one with God. There is no essential difference between one individual being and another. Since all are eternal expansions of Supreme Lord, the mind absorbed in false ego creates the material body, and by identification with the body, the conditioned soul is overwhelmed by false pride and ignorance, as described here. Persons who identify with this body, which is simply the product of the material mind, are blinded in their intelligence, thinking of terms I and mine, because of their illusion of this I, but this is someone else. they wander in endless darkness. If you say that these people are the cause of my happiness and distress, then where is the place of the soul in such a conception? This happiness and distress pertain not to the soul, but to the interactions of material bodies. If someone bites his tongue with his own teeth, whom he can be angry on this suffering? Nobody. He has to blame himself. If you say that the other gods who rule the bodily sense cause suffering, still have still how can such suffering apply to the spirit soul? This acting and being acted upon are merely interactions of the changeable senses and their presiding deities. When one limb of the body attacks another, with whom can the person in the body be angry? If the soul himself were the cause of happiness and distress, then we could not blame others. Since happiness and distress could be simply the nature of the soul, according to this theory, nothing except the soul actually exists. And if we were to perceive something besides the soul, that would be illusion. Therefore, since happiness and distress do not actually exist in this concept, why become angry at oneself or others? If the soul himself were the cause of happiness and distress, then we could not blame others, since happiness and distress would be simply the nature of the soul. According to this theory, nothing except the soul actually exists. And if we were to perceive something besides the soul, that would be illusion. Therefore, since happiness and distress do not actually exist in this concept, why become angry at oneself or others? And if we examine the hypothesis that the planets are the immediate cause of suffering and happiness, then also where is the relationship with the soul who is eternal? After all, the effect of the planets applies only to things that have taken birth. Expert astrologers have moreover explained how the planets are only causing the pain to each other. Therefore, since the living entity is distinct from those planets and from the material body, against whom should he vent his own anger? If we assume that fruitive work is the cause of happiness and distress, if we assume the fruitive work is the cause of happiness and distress, we still are not dealing with the soul. The idea of material work arises when there is a spiritual actor who is conscious and material body that undergoes the transformation of happiness and distress as a reaction to such work. Since the body has no life, it cannot be the actual recipient of happiness and distress. Since the body has no life, it cannot be actual recipient of happiness and distress, nor can the soul, who is ultimately completely spiritual and aloof from the material body. Since karma thus has no ultimate basis in either the body or the soul, at whom can one become angry? If we accept time as the cause of happiness and distress, that experience still cannot apply to the spirit soul, since the time is manifestation of Lord's spiritual potency, and the living entities are also the expansions of the Lord's spiritual potency manifesting through time. Certainly, a fire does not burn its own flames or sparks, nor does the cold harm its own snowflakes or hail. In fact, the spirit soul is transcendental and beyond the experience of material happiness and distress. At whom, therefore, should one become angry? The false ego gives a shape to illusory material existence and thus experiences material happiness and distress. The spirit soul, however, is transcendental to material nature. He can never actually be affected by material happiness. The spirit soul, the false ego gives a shape to illusory material existence and thus experiences material happiness and distress. The spirit soul, however, is transcendental to material nature. He can never actually be affected by material happiness and distress in any place, under any circumstance, or by the agency of any person. A person who understands this has nothing whatsoever to fear from the material creation. I shall cross over the insurmountable ocean of nescience by being firmly fixed in the service of the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. This was approved by the previous acharyas who were fixed in firm devotion to the Lord Paramatma, Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thus becoming a detached upon the loss of his property, this sage gave up his this moroseness. He left home taking sannyasa and began to travel about the earth. Even when insulted by foolish rascals, he remained unanswered from his duty and chanted his song. Those becoming free from the materialistic way of life, which involves grueling austerities performed to acquire money, may chant the preceding song of Vaishnava Sannyasi. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakura states that if one is not capable of listening to the song of this sannyasi, then one will certainly remain an obedient servant of material illusion. No other force besides his own mental confusion makes the soul experience happiness and distress. No other force besides his own mental confusion makes the soul experience happiness and distress. His perception of friends, neutral parties, and enemies, and the whole material life he builds around this perception are simply created out of ignorance. My dear Uddhava, fixing your intelligence on me, my dear Uddhava, fixing your intelligence on me, you should thus completely control the mind. This is the essence of this science of yoga. My dear Uddhava, fixing your intelligence on me, you should thus completely control the mind. This is the essence of the science of yoga. Anyone who listens to or recites to others this song of the sannyasi, which presents scientific knowledge of the absolute, and who thus meditates upon it with full attention, will never again be overwhelmed by the dualities of material happiness and distress. The Vaishnava sannyasi took shelter of the devotional service to the Lord Krishna and thus could overcome the illusory potency of his worshipable object, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He himself meditated upon and heard this song and also taught it to others. Having received the Lord's mercy, he enlightened other conditioned souls with transcendental intelligence so that they could also follow in the footsteps of the devotees of the Lord. Religion actually means to become a pure devotee of the Supreme Lord in loving service. Those who are trying to enjoy the material world, those who are trying to enjoy the material world or merely renounce it to avoid personal inconveniency cannot actually understand love of Godhead, in which the only objective is the satisfaction of the Lord. Anyone who listens to or recites to the others this song of sannyasi, which presents scientific knowledge of the absolute, and who thus meditates upon it with full attention, will never again be overwhelmed by the dualities of material happiness and distress. This and the purports of the humble servants of His Divine A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada to the 11th canto, 23rd chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Song of Avanthi Brahmana. नमोस्तु अनंताय सहस्रमूर्तये सहस्रपादाक्षरभा सहस्रनाम्ने पुरुषाष्टये सहस्रकोटियुगधारिणे नमः आकाशात् पतितं यथागत सागरं सर्वदेव नमस्कारः श्रीकेशवं प्रगत्यो नमः सर्ववेदेश पुण्यं सर्वतीर्थेषु तत्परं प्रमाप्य वासनात् वासुदेवस्य वास्तन्ते जगत्त्रयं सर्वभूतनिवासोऽसि वासुदेवनुते कायेन वाचा मनसेन्द्रियैर्वा बुद्ध्यात्मना वा प्रकृते स्वभावात् करोमि यद्यत् सकलं परस्मै नारायणायेति समर्पयामि नारायणायेति समर्पयामि नारायणायेति समर्पयामि हरि ओम।